this video, we're going to be looking at JavaScript and then the DOM. Now, let's start off with talking about what JavaScript is and some of the things we're going to be doing. So JavaScript is a programming language of the web. You can actually use it for a lot of other things other than the web now. But for purposes to not confuse anyone, let's just think of it right now as the language of the web. And so today, seeing this video coming to my class, JavaScript has become a lot more like other modern languages. It does have a reputation of being maybe an oddball language, or I've even heard it referred to as graffiti or other weird and wild terms because it isn't as good as Java or C++ or Rust. But the great thing that I think JavaScript has going for it is because it could kind of like change. There's so many libraries and projects and things people have built with it that just kind of in virtue of it being so flexible, it could adapt to a lot of modern needs and also very rapidly and very quickly. So even if it isn't your most favorite language you've learned, if you're going to go into web development, it is one of those things that I think will only take you farther the better you are at it. And so what we're going to do then is we're going to look at some of the basic ways to use JavaScript. And I'm assuming at this point you've already worked with some programming languages in your career so far. If you want to have me make some kind of additional videos to this where I go into deeper dives into JavaScript, let me know in the description, that's my job, in the comments down below, and I will try to assemble what I can with what you need to know. But we're just going to make some variables, show you how to make something in air quotes private, do the whole loops, conditionals, functions, and then whatever else comes our way. And then after that, what we're going to do is inspect the DOM, because the JavaScript language we have is great for a million things, but it's going to give us the ability to access our actual web page and make changes to it. Now, later on, we're going to do things like get information from other websites and services and then put them in our website. But for right now, let's just think of JavaScript as not just a programming language, but a way to manipulate the web page that we've already made with HTML and CSS. And we could do some pretty awesome things with that. So let's go ahead and look at some of the basics of JavaScript to get us going. So what I want to do here now is go through some basic things in JavaScript. Once again, I'm assuming that you've already had another programming language up to this point. This is mainly for simple syntax. A lot of it will look incredibly familiar. And this is just kind of a quick, rundown of the things you might need, because the project later on for students in the class, they'll have to, come up with something, whatever. And it's not going to be rocket science, but I think this is a nice stop to kind of show us the things JavaScript will do if we haven't done it yet. And also, secondly, what I'm going to be doing is I'm using Node. Now, Node is let's just call it a package or a technology that I've downloaded that is, one, insanely popular, but two, allows me to do things like type node index.js, because I'm in the folder where this exists, where I've been doing all my other projects. And I could hit this, enter after this, and it'll run whatever JavaScript is in here. Now, you could do that. You don't have to do that. But one thing you can do is use that online REPL.it. You could do that. Or what you could also do is, let me bring this up here. You could use this, inspect it, click console, and you could do stuff like, let's do var my name equals Bernie, and then let's do a console log, which is, if you've taken Java, kind of like a system out print line, it's roughly the same thing. We're going to put my name in here, enter, and we get Bernie. So you could follow along this way if you want to. If you want to download Node and you feel comfortable using it, it's not that, hard of a thing. You're really just going to be doing stuff like this. Or if you want to use REPL.it, you could do that as well. So first, let's look at stuff that we're going to use all the time, which are variables. So let's make some just basic variables here, and I'm going to go through and explain them. So the first one is var.myname is Bernie. Well, let's compare that with the next one. So we have these three right here. And what's going on is that we have var, let, and const. I think we can maybe come to a conclusion about what const is, but what is let versus var? And so var is interesting. Var and let, we could think at a low level is kind of doing the same thing. We're taking Bernie, and wherever we use my name is going to be Bernie, right? And the same with dog age is 1. Wherever I use dog age, it's going to be 1. So then why do we need two, different kind of qualifiers here, describing this variable? Can I change it? Can I not? And so let will focus on the scope of wherever you write it. And this may be getting a little bit ahead, but I always use let or const. One thing that var will get you in trouble with is that it does this thing called hoisting. It's maybe at this time a little bit advanced of a topic, but say you have a bunch of things named var, and then you use these, variables inside of a function. You may have inconsistencies with your data, stuff not being there or being overwritten, or just stuff that may puzzle your brain. Let pays much more attention to scope, whether it's in a function, outside of a function, in a loop, other stuff along those lines. And so I want accuracy. And it's not like I haven't used var in the past, but these both here, const and let, are valid in all browsers as far as I know for a long time now. So you're probably never, ever, ever going to see me use var. But if you're ever out in the wild on Stack Overflow, another website, and you use var, it's fine. Just know that, like I said, sometimes you may get some spooky stuff going on because of this thing called hoisting. But any var you see could translate to a let, and it should be fine. So the next thing I want to show down here is how to make something private. And the real answer to that is you can't. Watch me break my own rule here, but we have var favorite food equals pizza. And let's just change this to let. So we have this here, but we have an underscore in front. When we do functions later in this section of the video too, I can still put an underscore in front of it. Now, there is no, package, protection or calling something truly private like there is, say, in Java or other more, terse languages. Maybe not terse, but more exact languages. But if someone else goes to use your files that you're using or your functions or your variables, and they see that there's an underscore in front of it, this is more of a notation to the other developers, including yourself if you forget, that this is private. And so it's not something you should be using or accessing directly. On my job, I see this here and there and everywhere. But then again, you may not see this a ton. But if you ever see an underscore in front of something, that's just more of a, a convention rather than it truly doing something special in JavaScript. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make two different things that you're going to see a lot. The first is an array. So let's go ahead and do this. So this is an array. I assume you've seen these before. And so this is just a basic array. It's a to-do list. It's a bunch of, strings right here, sleep, walk Bernie, and sleep again. That's typically what my weekends are like because I'm exhausted. But this is the syntax you would use to make an array. Now, another thing you may see constant, or not constant, but out in the wild a lot, are objects. And there's a few ways you can make objects. I'm just going to make one quick one to just kind of differentiate the syntax between an array and an object. So for an array, we have kind of the square brackets up here, but for an object, we have the squiggly brackets. We also notice that it's comma separated. This is comma separated too, but this is a key value pair. So this is breed. So if I was to use this, say I wanted a console log. And like I said, console log is like a system out print line in Java. So if I wanted to access directly, the name or the breed, I could come in here and do dog dot, and it's auto-populating here. We use an IntelliSense breeder name. So we're going to do name. I'm going to come in here. I have node and then index.js lined up. I'm going to hit enter and I get Bernie. He's sleeping in his crate right now and he's probably wondering why I keep saying his name. And he's probably sad he can't come see me right now. But if we wanted to access, say, let me bring the console back up again. If we want to access something in the to-do list, this is in the first index. So let's go ahead and try this again. And we get sleep. And there are a lot of different methods for objects and for arrays and for, other things you come across. I don't think this is the video or early section to spend hours going into JavaScript. This is just a slight primer here. So be sure to look up different ways to, alter your objects or alter your arrays when you come to it. And I personally find that you don't have to memorize them all. I certainly don't. But what you have to know is, you'll get to a sense of, it's possible to do. You just may have forgot the syntax or the command to do it. I look up stuff all the time. So if you have to, you're already a pro. So don't worry. So let's look at conditionals now. Like I said, I imagine most of y'all have already had some programming, but I'm going to keep going through this stuff here. So conditionals, let's start with a simple if else kind of statement. So let's start with x equals 11. If x is greater than 10, we're going to console log this. So we save that. And let's go ahead and, I know I've been using node, but I could also hit play and it'll do essentially the same thing. So it's greater than 10. Another thing I could do up here is simply delete the brackets, because if I'm running one line, maybe it's a function or something else, and it hits this condition, I'm going to go ahead and do this, and we see that it says greater than 10, and it's all contained on one line right here, which is pretty cool. So now that we have that, let's come in here and do an else. And we'll do womp womp if it's the case that it is not greater than 10. So let's make this 9. You see it auto-formatted for me. You don't need to have the semicolons here, but it just does it for me. I haven't turned that off yet. So let's go ahead and run this. Scroll, and you see we get womp womp, because when it evaluates here, it's expecting this to be true. And since it's false, it's going to go to the next thing right here, which is print this out. You don't always need to have an else. when you have an if-else statement or you have a condition trying to be met. It really depends on your scenario and your flow of information. But, this is how you set up for an if-else. If I wanted to, though, I could do something like this. So now I have if, and then I have else if, and then I have else. And we know it's not going to meet the condition of 9 being greater than 10. That's just, we can't, it's not true, right? But 9 is greater than 8. And so it won't hit this condition right here that goes womp womp, because it will meet this if statement, and then it kicks out of everything below it. If there was another 30 else ifs here, as soon as it meets one condition, it's done. Now, just as a reminder, you don't want to have the x equals or x is greater than 8 before x is greater than 10. If you're doing some kind of numerical evaluation, you want to make sure that these are put in the correct order, because you may have an incorrect sequence trigger. And if you have a lot of other code going on, you may not catch it. So just keep in mind, if you have a bunch of else ifs, that you may want to, make sure they're in order, or you could break them up and, have an if or a bunch of if statements. Once again, it depends on what your needs are. So let's go ahead and run this. And we get greater than 8. So that is how we make if, else if, and else using JavaScript. So now let's look at switches. If you're comfortable with if, else if kind of logic, this is more of the same thing. It's just a different way of implementing it. And it really depends upon, sorry, right there, I got a frog in my throat. It really depends upon your preference of what you want to use. Switch statements have their purpose, but I don't think you want to pollute your code with them. And so we have this right here. So let's do this. So this is going to be this key that is auto-populating with is going to be value. And it's going to be this value. So this is the variable name that is looking for here. And the case right here, let's do 5. And then let's just copy and paste that down here. Move this on over just so we have a couple to work with. And let's do 4. We're going to console log is 5 out. And then we're going to console log is 4 out. So what should happen is that we hit this right here with this being 5, and let's test this. Okay, sorry for that funny edit right there. I knew this worked, but something happened with my IntelliJ, so I had to do a quick edit there. But is 5 out? That's kind of a weird thing to say out loud. So 5 in is 5 out. And so let's change this to 4. We did CLS, I'm on Windows, so that clears out my terminal here. And we're just going to type, or I could type in for this example. Once again, you could be doing this in REPL.it or in a Chrome browser in the console when you're using the developer tools. So index.js, we see that it says is 4 out. Now let's say none of the conditions are met. You always want to have a default here. We'll have it say, whoa. And so once again, it's 4. Let's just change this to 0. So it's going to be 0, case 5. Nope, doesn't match, doesn't match. And we should just hit the default. And we see, whoa, right here. But you may be looking at these breaks. What are these breaks doing? Well, let's remove one and change this to 5. I'm going to type CLS to clear this out. So there's no break right here. Let's go ahead and see what happens. And we see is 5 out, is 4 out. And this is the interesting thing with an if statement, it like does this for you. You will not have to explicitly return anything in an if statement when it meets a condition. It just does it right. Here, you have to type in break. So it'll meet the condition. It'll be like, okay, in this case, this is 5 coming on through here to here. Yes, this is indeed 5, console log. But if there's no break, it will just automatically flow down to the next case, even if it's not correct. So you need to explicitly, I don't know why I did that, but we need to explicitly tell it in here that we want to break. And this is how you use a switch statement. You may not use these a ton, but they're kind of nice for some instances where you kind of want maybe a bit more, I don't know, robust setup for code, because maybe you don't want a ton of if statements. Maybe there'll be just some ways that maybe you manage your data in your application or something along those lines. It'll look cleaner using a switch statement rather than a bunch of if or else if statements. The next thing we're going to talk about is a for loop. These are super basic, usually by the first or second class. If I remember right, in computer science, you learn these. And so we're going to type in for. Let's see what this does for us. Oh, this is interesting. So it gives us a lot of stuff right here. Let's go ahead and just do, rather than array length, we could use an array for this, by the way. We'll just do 5. Tighten this up right here. And so now we have this for loop right here. It's going to start at 0, right? And then it's going to, check, is this less than 5? It's going to do its action, and then it's going to, increase its value by 1. So let's go ahead and run this. Let me run this one more time. I think my IDE is being weird. There we go. It like cut it off right there. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, because obviously it starts at 0, which is, where you start most things in computer science, right? And then it just keeps incrementing. And as soon as it sees that the value is greater than 5, it no longer will do this action anymore. The next thing we're going to look at is, I think it's called like an advanced for loop. I think that's what it's called in Java. I'm just going to call this the same thing. So whereas with the previous for loop, you could actually control stuff, right? Rather than have, this at the end of your loop, you could do +3 if you wanted to. You have a lot more control, but say you want to definitely loop through linearly without skipping around the beginning to the end of this array right here. We could come in and do this. Save that right here. Let's bring this up. We're going to do node index.js, and we see sleep, walk Bernie, and then sleep. And it moves through it there, one right after the other. Whereas, like I said, with the previous for loop, you could even do every other, depending upon how you increment your index values you move along. As we saw earlier, you could use objects, but can you iterate through them? And the answer is yes, you could iterate through them. And I know especially in when I saw Java or other languages, I was uneasy using, dictionaries or hash maps or whatever they're named in other languages, but they're very, very easy to use and they're extremely powerful. So say I want to loop over this, how would I go about doing it? And it's incredibly easy. And you don't have to memorize it either. sometimes I will be like, how do you do this? And then I'll look it up and, voila. And then I move on with my day and then cash my paycheck like everyone else. So up here we have this dictionary of dogs. So we have the key value, key value, key value. So all the keys are dog 1, dog 2, dog 3. And then we have, the value for the first one is Bernie. Then we have Fido, and then we have Woof Woof. I thought that was a cute sounding dog name. I only have Bernie, but maybe I'll end up getting a Woof Woof when I get a house. But the key is this thing. So for the key in dog, which is the dictionary, I'm going to, as I loop through, print out dog 1, dog 2, dog 3. But if I want to access the value, I could just plug this in right here, which is the object. And then I just have to insert the key to get the value. So if I say, hey, dictionary, here's the key for dog 1, give me the return value. So let's go ahead and run this and see the result. And we see, in fact, we get dog 1, dog 2, dog 3. And then on the same line as dog 1, we get Bernie because we're asking the dictionary using the key to get Bernie. And then rinse and repeat for dog 2 for Fido, and then, dog 3 for Woof Woof. And this is one I recommend looking at, getting used to, just as comfortable as you are with arrays, because there'll be a time in your career where you're handling gigantic, maybe arrays of stuff or lists, but you may also have very deeply nested objects. And so knowing how to navigate those while you could see stuff like this is pretty easy to do. It's also pretty important to know how to do. So now we're going to look at a while loop. And we already looked at the for loop earlier. And a while loop is different than a for loop because a while loop will just keep going until you hit a condition, and it may run for a while. Whereas a for loop kind of informs the developer that you intend to start somewhere and finish somewhere. Now you can make your while loops just like that, but it's kind of just the nature of the while loop. So now we're starting at 20 up here. And while this value of x, poorly named, but x is fine, so we're doing a small example, is greater or equal to 10, we're going to keep printing it out. And let's actually, that's not what I wanted to do because we'll never reach it, right? It'll keep getting bigger. So let's do a countdown then of making this move from 20 down to 10 and making it stop. We see we start at 20 and then we dwindle our way all the way down to 10, and then it stops because the condition is no longer such that x is greater than or equal to 10. As soon as it hits this value, poof, it's done. Now we could have put a bunch of other stuff in here, some more complicated things, but anything you do, with any of these loops can be translated eventually back to a for loop. It really just depends, once again, on the nature of your scenario here. So I use for loops 99% of the time, while loops a little bit, and these next ones I don't think I've used since I've left college. Even after my first intro to computer science class, I never used them. So those are do while loops. So we have this right here, and then let's do console log. Let's just our variable here. And then our condition is going to be the same as it was previously. X greater than or equal to 10. So let's save this. Let's clear this out. And let's run this again. And so you see we start at 20 and then we get down to, 10 right here. And what's interesting about this is that do while is insanely similar to while, but say you want the action to occur first, you could flip this. So if something has to run at least once, and then it'll check and be like, sorry, I can't do it twice or however many more times, you could use a do while to do stuff like that. Now, once again, depending upon your coding needs, you may not need this, and there may be other parts of your code you could take care of, like a preemptive check or update of something. But if you ever do need that rare instance where you're going to loop through something, but you need the code or the logic to kick off at least once, a do while may be something that you're going to use. Now we're going to look at the 3 function types. There's a couple other variations out there, dependent upon more of your entire website. But just for the JavaScript kind of style of doing things, I'm going to show you the 3. And the first is a named function. And it's named because this has a name. It's add 5. We will give it a number, and then it returns. So it'll give us the value back. So let's go ahead and return to console log add 5. And so we should get 10 back. And we see that we do right here get 10 back at the bottom. Sweet. But let's do this another way. Let's do something called add 6. And we see that this is slightly different. Add 5, add 6, but there's a little bit more stuff going on here. And so all we're doing is we're taking this function right here, and then we're assigning it to this const called add 6. And if you only have one argument coming in, you don't need these parentheses around it. You could just have number floating out there by itself. I always wrap it in parentheses because you never know. You may have to update your code. But also, I think it's good housekeeping. If you're going to do something or the way your team does something, keep doing it. Especially if there's a lot of legacy code, you're not going to want to, you want to keep things in a certain format. So how do we use this? We have add 5. Is there anything other that we have to do, anything, special? The answer is no. We have add 6 right here, and we're calling it just like we did add 5. It's just how we create it is slightly different. And we have 11. And also I want to let y'all know this arrow right here is a fat arrow, and that is all. So next what I'm going to do is make the third way of doing this. Of course, what's a tutorial without a typo? Remove this, come down. And so we have this right here, and this is like a nameless function because it has function like this does, but there's no name to it. It's just we're assigning it just like this right here, but rather than do this whole thing with the fat arrow, our engine or the language itself will be able to infer that this is going to be a function. So now we're going to go ahead and add 7. Going to run this, and now we get 12. So these are the 3 styles you may see out in the wild. I am, when writing in React, which we're definitely not going to do in this class, I definitely love doing this here. But you're going to see you can see different variations of these. And so, pick one that works for you, or if you're working in teams, kind of see what the standard is. And maybe they don't care. Maybe someone on the team will write functions like this, someone else will write them like that. But these are the ways that you could use functions. And I hope that this basic kind of primer or refresher to JavaScript helps out. And the next section was actually get to working on the DOM and manipulating it and doing some fun stuff. So now that we've seen those examples of JavaScript, let's focus on the DOM. Now, the DOM stands for the Document Object Model, and it is the logical way in which our web page is structured. So what I'm showing on the screen right now is a basic, small, tiny screenshot of some HTML. There's no special, CSS or JavaScript stuff going on in there, even though we have, our imports coming on in. We shouldn't focus on those too much. So then now let's compare that to the other image on the screen, which is the DOM tree. We could see that we have a document starting at the very top, which you may be thinking, what is the document? Well, we're going to get to use it and code out what the document is, and you'll see that it's a quite powerful object that we could use to access and do things to our site. But then below that is a child, which you already have seen on your screen a million times, which is HTML. And then what should look familiar is the body. And then within the body, we see all of the other elements that are on the page. And by now we've discussed, sibling and parent-child relationships. So now that you see the original HTML, you should now be able to look at this tree, and they're both very, very small. Keep in mind from the example we saw earlier that websites, especially if they're auto-generated using some kind of, software, could be gigantic. There's a lot going on. So this is a very simplified explanation. But we could see now that the H1 and H2 are now, children of the body element. And then we have the unordered list. And then we could see that the list items are also children of the unordered list element. It just makes sense, right? That things have these specific relations to each other. Another thing that we may not notice or may be new to us may be the text and then the attribute nodes that are hanging off of some of these elements we see on the tree. We look at our HTML and we think, well, that's like, does that make sense? That's kind of weird, right? But when we look at the breakdown of the tree, we will have access not just to, the H1 element or the list, but in order to maybe access the text, we now know that it's not just the list item that we have access to, but there's a specific node that, the list item, uses, which is the text. And also there is the attribute of all of the elements as well for the, either IDs or classes or whatever else we have attached to it. And so this may be a little intimidating at first, but there is code that we could use to just access the H1 and get all the text. But if we want to cycle through and inspect all the nodes, intimately and do something with them or change them in whatever way we want to, we have access to do that too. So we don't always have to go through all these tiny little nodes if you just want to access the unordered list. There's ways to do that easily, and you don't have to think about any of those little tiny, nodes of its children or anything like that. So this is a really, really, really tiny example, but let's go ahead and look at an example of us having a smaller website and doing some DOM practice. This is going to be broken down into 2 parts. So let's go ahead with part 1. Okie dokie. So we have our typical layout here, and we're not going to be using assets at all, even though, I'm sure this picture of Bernie, God, he looks so strange in this picture. Sure, he would love this picture to be used, but we're not going to be using assets. All we're going to be doing is using this And I know it says, we're bringing some styles here and we got all this stuff. Let's go ahead and delete this just for peace of mind. And we're just going to be using the index.js because we're going to be looking at manipulating and working with the DOM. So I'm going to drag this down below because I kind of realized that side-by-side code kind of gets ugly. And I want this to be as readable as possible because not everyone's will want to go to my GitHub page and look at this stuff. So I have this going on. I'm going to pull this on over. And this is the page as is. I hit the go live for the live server. Once again, if you don't know how to do that, I think on Windows, was it Control-Shift-P, and I think it's Command-Shift-P, and then live server appears at the top, or you could just search for it that way. So we have DOM Fun Part 1. This is our title. Once again, you do not need a CSS style sheet in here. And let's look what we have on the page before we dive on in. And so we have this H1, which says DOM methods here at the top. Let me click to unhighlight that. We next have a div with a class of text wrapper around this paragraph tag, and it says ID some text. This is some text. Nothing insanely interesting happening here. We have an unordered list. And I think this is actually a typo because I copied this over from my other page, so I wouldn't be just typing this out long ways. If I need that later, I'll know why. I don't know why it said TA there. But hey, programming is full of typos. So then we have our list items, item 1, 2, 3. This has a name, name 3. That's going to come into play later on. And what do we have down here? We just have another text wrap. We have text wrapper -2. Not the best naming, but this is a small example, so I could get away with being a bit careless right here. Once again, you will want to have more unique qualifiers in your CSS naming conventions. And then I have a paragraph tag with the name Bernie, just because for an example. Then we have this element has a name. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to extend this over, and it's going to overlap, as you can see here. When I click in here, I'm going to come back over. And why am I going to do this? Because I'm going to click inspect. And then I'm going to click on the console here. And what we're going to do is we're going to just break this video up into 2 sections here for actually manipulating and going after the DOM. And we're going to go with some of our just basic things everyone should know. It's definitely not the end all be all. Don't take this video as the gospel. There are a lot of other examples of how to do, other methods of retrieving stuff from your page and manipulating your page, as well as more advanced and other strategies you could use. Once again, this course is like, I think a professor once told me, it's a mile wide and an inch deep. So this is just to get you going. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do getElementById. And this is exactly as it sounds. So let's get an element by ID and let's go ahead and get some text. Let's just grab this and see what it retrieves for us. So we have getElementById. And you notice here, this is interesting. So when I'm in CSS and I'm going to add a style, right? I have to do something like that for an ID or add a period for a class. But with this, it already knows it's going to be an ID. So it's just saying, hey, look for some text. So we're going to come down here. We're going to do a lot of console logging because rather than take something and then pair it with something, and then before you know it, you have a big project. I don't think that's very fair. This is very piecemeal. And let's go ahead and take some text. We're going to save. And so what we can see right here is that this is console logging out to the terminal here, which is this console that exists in the browser. Once again, we've already gone over some of the Chrome developer tools. So this should be a little bit more aware in, with your knowledge so far. And so we're just grabbing, this is some text, but to get the element, you can see it is ripping the entire thing out. So now as a variable is some text, we are now holding this like exact same element right here. And that is pretty cool. I don't have to, I'm going to go through a big process to grab this, then grab that, then grab this. Now that I have this some text right here, or, this element, now I could start to change, manipulate, replace, do some other things with it. And I'm not going to do that exactly right now, but keep in the back of your head, we just grab something easily off of our website, and now you have it stored as a variable, and all of these elements that you see have attributes. So now you can begin to play with them a bit more. The next one we're going to look at is getElementsByClassName. This one and a lot of these are as they exactly sound. So we're going to get elements, so multiple, because remember a class, you could get, one element could have a class, but classes are meant to be spread across, one to many kinds of elements across the page. And so let's go ahead and see how this works for us. And what we're going to do is we're going to get list class right here. We're going to save this. And then we see we get an HTML collection coming back. Well, this is pretty cool. So this is a kind of, object structure that is being given back to you. So keep in mind that there are the HTML collections, but now I'm blanking on this, but you could get like the node elements as well, which we will see eventually. But HTML collection, all this is, you're just getting, and it's cool because as you highlight over them, it's showing you on the left-hand side of the browser when you're in dev mode what they're referring to. And so we could click on them, and then now we have all of these line item elements. You can see we're getting, it says the dot list class here, so clearly we've targeted it correctly. But now as we click down, we can start to see all of the attributes we see here. We can see InnerHTML, inner text is item 3. We could see, next sibling is text. This makes sense when we're talking about nodes. If you remember a little bit earlier about the conversation between, having an element, but then you have like the different kinds of nodes on the screen. This is what it's referring to when it says next sibling. If you're like, wait, I thought this is just one HTML kind of, or, a line item element here, that this is giving you a little bit more high level of return than like a list of all the nodes would. But you could still, once we have this contained, we now have a list of all of them, and then we could also access any of these attributes here if we want to. Now, don't get overwhelmed. This is a lot. This is a heck of a whole lot. And in my career, sometimes you need to pop one of these open and check something to see if it's behaving correctly or it's been modified correctly. But in no way do you have to know all these, memorize all of them. Typically, you will know what you need to be working on and what you need to work for. So don't get too hung up in having to know what all of these mean. If an employer ever asks you for all of these, just run away from the job. So next one we're going to do is we're going to get elements by name. So let's go ahead and set this up. And which one are we going to do here? let's get this one. Actually, I did by tag name accidentally. It filled it in wrong. As it happens when you use autocorrect sometimes. You get very, very similar stuff, but not the one you want. So this has a name of Bernie. So let's see if we could actually pick this out right here. And so this is named element. So it's a list, right? It's an array. So let's do this. And then let's do something a little fun. Let's use an attribute here. Let's do text content. And we see that this element has a name. So we're using getElementsByName. We only have one of these, one of these things on here with a name. As we scroll up and then scroll back down, we're looking for the name is equal to Bernie. And then when we get this back, there's only one in here. And we now get, the text content. As you saw, I had, a lot of stuff I could scroll through to look at, to bring out. And in that last example where we looked at all the, everything with the list class, and you saw that gigantic list of attributes. And here in Visual Studio Code with our IntelliSense, there's a lot of those things that we could access, right? They're not off limits to us. So doing the, text content here is just one of the many things that we could get. And as you can see, it just gives us the text here, which is pretty cool. And so why would you do getElementsByName compared to an ID or a class name or something along those lines? And with many things in programming, it comes down to, well, it depends. It's really up to your scenario, what it is you're trying to do, change, look for. Maybe even some of these are better for debugging than others, because sometimes, your page mutates and changes as you get values in, right? And so some of these are going to be more prevalent than others, but in my humble opinion, it's way better to have almost like too damn many selectors than not enough, right? So this is how you get something by name here. And the next one we're going to look at, let's see here. We're going to do getQuerySelector. So this is a document method, and just like we've been doing document dot, but it returns the first element within the document that matches the specified selector or the group of selectors. So if no matches are found, null is going to be returned. And if that is just a complete mouthful, let's see it in action here. And so since it will return the first element, let's prove this. And so let's look for list class, because we have a bunch of them here. And it says if it gets the first one, let's test that out. We're going to console log, as we are with everything out here. And we see, as we highlight this here, it's highlighting it in our actual web page on the left-hand side. We drop down and we see item 1. So that's pretty cool. This could be very handy, especially if you are getting in some data from somewhere else, and maybe you are creating a list or dynamically producing something on the page. But everything is going to have a type of class for your n number of like rows in your list or table, right? And so a query selector, something like this, is one of those things that could help you shuffle through, a gigantic list of things you have that have, similar names, classes, or groupings. So another way that we could use this is we could actually get a little bit more complex than this. So what are we going to do here? Let's go to this right here, and let's actually pull this out, but indirectly. So this one's going to be a little bit of fun. So what I just did was very direct, right? But what if I need to approach somewhere in my website indirectly, because those things need to happen? Once again, many strategies, many ways to do the same thing. So right now, I'm saying, okay, start at a div dot, so that means a class, right? Text wrapper 2, where's this at? Right here. Actually, this entire line. So we're saying start here and then give me the next paragraph tag in there. So give me the child of this right here. And so this is an indirect way of doing it. With .list class, it is much more direct. I'm saying, okay, look for these things here and give me the first one. Whereas with this, I'm getting a little bit more creative with how I'm approaching something. And once again, this may have to do with stuff dynamically loading or data coming in to your website that you aren't aware of or know how it may be formed until you get it. Because sometimes when there's an error, a success, something like that, it is possible for when you click a button or a user clicks a button to do something, log in, order food, something along those lines, that you may get information returned back to you from other software out there, other pieces of your code that return HTML to you, and you just slap it into your website. And those people making these HTML layouts may or may not work on your team. And so you may not know their naming conventions or what kind of format things are going to be in when you get them. So this is incredibly powerful because there will be times in your career as a web developer that you may not know how to directly approach something, but you may have to just sneak in from a parent div and then look down into what's there. And that's maybe a lot of word salad, but just keep that in the back of your mind. The next thing we're going to do is a query selector. And this is just all. So we could just come in here and let's just look for paragraph, and we could do querySelectorAll. We'll change this to queries so it looks correct. And we see we have a node list, which is different than the HTML. So let's see what's going on with this. We drop this down and we see that we have 2. So the first one has an ID of some text. So we're going to scroll up here and we see that, hey, we are getting in this ID of some text. Well, that's kind of cool. And the second one doesn't have an ID or a class, so that matches up. And as we could see, as we hover over this, it matches the paragraph tag at the bottom. But if it had a class, it would be appended right here. And this up here has an ID, which we just saw together, does match, the ID of some hyphen text. And so you may be thinking, like, where the hell is the rest of the stuff? Like, there's clearly more code out there. And the reason for this is that it's a node list. It is returning to you the paragraph element. Keep in mind, like earlier in our diagram, there are, attribute, nodes. There's the text nodes as well. So if you wanted to, you could use another kind of, query selector or another kind of selector, maybe an ID selector. But this is an example I just wanted to show that sometimes you'll get your full-blown HTML back, and sometimes you'll just get the specific paragraph element itself back. And those are very important to differentiate. The next one we're going to do is getElementsByTagName. And so we're going to use a div right here. And to explain kind of what is a tag here, a tag is a read-only element. So we're going to go ahead and get everything that is a div. So we have this, and it looks like we have two divs right here. So let's come and see what this gives us down below. And we see we have an HTML collection compared to a node. So we should have a much more, I guess, robust, contained, set or not set, list of elements coming back to us. And we see we have the dot text wrapper and the dot text wrapper too. This may be hard on your screen because this is tiny here, but you see that it says text wrapper here and text wrapper 2 right here. Now we're going to drop this down and we see more of the same, right? It matches, what's up here. As we click into it, this is the first index. This is the second index. We get the length of 2. And then once again, we click the drop down and we have all of these attributes here. So say we wanted in our code for whatever reason, we wanted to get all of the elements by a certain tag, a read-only element, on the screen. And say we wanted to change the second one here. Well, now we could just access this tag elements and then do something like this. And then now we could start playing around with it. And so what I'm going to do now is go to the very, very last example here, and we're actually going to have some fun with this. Create element. So we're going to make an H3 right here. And so we have this. So we just made an H3 element, so that's cool. We're storing it in a variable, which is also super cool. That means we could move it, we could store it. Maybe we want to put it through a loop or something along those lines, so that's awesome. But we got to add something to it, right? So let's do heading 3, and let's do InnerHTML. Now, I wouldn't put DOM master on your LinkedIn profile or anything for comedic reasons, but we have now the inner text. So we have the element we're accessing with the dot operator here, inner HTML. So this is the text that's going to be on the screen, DOM master, right? And let's do this. Document.body append child. Oh, that's not. It's clearly that was all the wrong autofills right there. The same will happen to you as well. You'll go to a coworker and be like, "Why doesn't my code work?" And it changed something, and your eyes didn't catch it. And we see we have DOM master. So what's going on right here is we created the element H3. We said, hey, we want the inner HTML to be DOM master, as you can see right here. And we access the document. We accessed the body, this guy right here, right? And we said, okay, we want you to add this on to the body. So it just plops it down here at the bottom. And then now we get this DOM master right here, and we just created this. And so I think that's pretty powerful. That's pretty cool. In the next section, we're going to be doing more stuff with the DOM. I just wanted to break it up, and I'll see y'all in just a moment. So in this section, what we're going to do is take some of those concepts that we've previously learned and worked with when accessing different parts of the DOM. And we're going to introduce some new attributes and things you could do to the page and actually start manipulating things a bit more. But also we're going to mix in there ways to search and ask different elements for more information. So I changed the HTML structure from last time. It's still relatively small. So we have, let me just hit a space here to make it easier. So we have this H1 with an ID of H1. And then we have this div here, an ID of node. And then we have a child element of an H2, and this says attribute fun or att-fun. We have another list because lists are always very handy for these kinds of things. And then we just have a paragraph element here with an ID. And as you notice, I don't believe I have any classes in here that shouldn't, do anything bad, but we, let's go ahead and let's go ahead and get started with our first example here. So what we're going to do now is we're going to use append child, inner text, create text node, and then create an element. So I'm going to show you another way that you could create an element, add some text to it, and then put it on the page. So let's go ahead and get started. That's clearly not what I had in my intentions. So far what we have done is we created an element. This should be relatively fresh. And then we're creating this text node. So remember earlier we did, I think it was the inner text or inner HTML, and we were able to bang this out a little bit quicker. But this is another way that you could go through and you could create an element, and then its actual node, you could come in here and create as well. So what we have to do then is append this text node to our element we created. So we have to append text to appended element. And it's going to be called appended element because it's actually going on the, well, I'll show you in a second here. So we have appended element. We're going to do append child and text. So the next thing we're going to do, let's do this. Document, we're going to do get element by, I don't know why I did that, by ID. And then let's go to node. And where is node at? Node is right here. So before we did it with body in our last example we saw in the previous section, this we're actually going to get this, and then we're going to append our appended element to it. We see that this says magic. This is kind of neat. Let's go ahead and inspect this right here. So we see node, which makes sense because we are getting the element by ID. So we're getting this node and we're appending a child of it. This H2 attribute fun is the first child. So we're giving it a sibling or another child, depending upon how you're looking at it in the DOM. And so you could see that we have the text node here of magic, and all we're doing in coming in is just slapping another H2 in there. And that is just a very easy, straightforward 4-line way. You could add more text to here. Now, if you wanted to do images, other stuff, you could do that as well. And I think this is a pretty nice example of just how to simply add some stuff in there. So this one right here, what we're going to do is get the child element count, because sometimes you want to loop over something, get a list. Debugging is always a reason for stuff like this. And we want to know how many children there are of our particular thing on the screen. And that's why we have a thing called a list. So let's go ahead and see how this works. And you notice right here that we're doing just dot child element count. We're not adding this on because it's not a, it's not a method or a function. It is just an attribute we are getting. So nothing huge there, but if you ever do this and you're like, oh man, this just isn't working right, ask yourself, is it, some kind of functionality or is it an existing attribute? And let's go into our console and we can see that there are 3 indeed. 1, 2, and 3. And we can see here, if we look at list, we see 1, 2, and 3. So that is pretty cool there that we have the ability to go in and inspect that, because maybe you have something set up on your web page where you're only pulling in a certain amount of information. And maybe in your checks or your testing or something like that, maybe something even goes wrong and you need to know exactly why something is over or under a certain, amount of children being put on your page. So awesome little piece of functionality there. So the next one down here we're going to do is do the same thing, but we're going to get, instead of an element, which is, the full verbose, more HTML thing you're used to typing up here. And we're going to do this. Child nodes. And so we're going to do this. So we're going to get all of the child nodes. And because it's not an element, that should tell you we're getting more specific stuff. So before we got 3, and now we have 7. So we have text, then our first line item, text, our line item with the ID, text, our line item with the ID, and then the text as well in here. And so this should be, used with, I don't want to say caution, but if you're really wanting to get the actual element and you see something like this, you're probably obviously using the wrong attribute, right? But what I want to show between the element and the node is that you can hone in on different parts of your DOM structure here. So you could get, much more high level, or you could actually dig into the line item and then the text that is associated with that line item as well, which is pretty cool. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the children. So let's come in here and do element children. And you see we get an HTML collection. So we just got the length and then we got all the nodes, but this is an HTML collection. So that should tell you it's closer to the stuff that we actually typed in our IDE, Visual Studio Code right here. So we have a collection of 3, which makes sense. And we have our first line item, second line item, third line item right here. And we have this like extra stuff right in here. But as you can see, 1, 2, 3, and then up here in HTML collection, we are getting 3 back. And so our first, slot in our array of the HTML collection objects here, like I've been showing you before, we could access this first line item now. And if we wanted to manipulate, change, add, append to something, we are more than able to do it now because we could access it. So before we saw that we could just get a list, how many are there? But now this gives you the list and the, all the contents within. But like many things, we could do manipulations of not just text or adding stuff to the body. We could also manipulate, the class name of something. So if we're thinking of CSS now, and we don't have any CSS in this project because I wanted to abstract or just really chop that out entirely. So let's go ahead and get this set up and I'll explain how it works. So nothing happened. We're not using a console log, so nothing's coming here, but we're getting this node right here and it says dot class name. So we're getting the attribute and we're assigning it the value updated class. So, okay, that's interesting. Oh, if we click right here, we see that we have now added an updated hyphen class name to our, element right here. And so think about this. Say you have, light mode, dark mode, or maybe an event happened somewhere else. Somebody clicked something. Or maybe you wanted to do something interesting, like at a certain time of day. You could change your classes in your CSS now on particular elements to change and update them. So for those that maybe enjoy CSS, there's probably some already that just could live without it. But now, rather than just add stuff to the page or change text, we could wholesale change the CSS that is getting applied to any of these elements. So in this example right here, what we're going to do is we're going to look for the first child of something. So let's go ahead and get something by an ID and ask for the first child to come back. We're going to store it and then we're going to log it out. And so we're getting list. We want the first child of this list to come back. And you notice this is kind of interesting because we're getting a text element now. And so this should tell you that we're getting a specific node that is coming back. And so remember before that the HTML, collection, those elements give you everything, and the node will just give you, more of that specific tree structure right here. And so what if we actually wanted to get the first actual element and not a node? Because usually those are the things that I look for. We could just do something easy like this. First element, and that may be the thing that tips you off, is try to look for the word element. And now we get item 1. Whereas before, we just got the node text that the line item will then use, which then the browser will merge together to get you the, item 1, 2. We've seen how to add things, add classes, but you could do the same thing with an ID as well. So let's go ahead and update an ID of something. So now we aren't logging anything out, but we should be able to look at this right here as some text. We're clicking on it and we see that the ID has been updated. Over here, it's just P for paragraph. But since we're bringing in the JavaScript here at the very bottom, everything gets loaded in here. This runs and it says, yeah, I think I'm going to take this ID attribute and I'm going to update it to updated ID. The next thing we're going to do is change the inner HTML. As you guess, this is going to just kind of change the text that's going to appear inside of a particular element. So let's go ahead and get this going. Bernie is awesome. So actually, this is updated ID. So let's go ahead and actually just do this here. Go back to P. So I was using my previous example there. When I do these all in a row, if you ever pull my notes down from GitHub there, you will see that I was linearly thinking of this. And for this video, I kind of want to chop these up. So fixed my error before I even produced it. So this, instead of saying some text here, should say Bernie is awesome. And we see that it says Bernie is awesome right here. And the ID is still key. So that's pretty cool. So another thing we may want to do is ask, what is the parent element? So let's go in here and let's go ahead and get this set up. And once again, this kind of goes to the strategy of maybe we want to not directly access something and ask a question, because it may be something that could be potentially unknown to us. Like I said, we're loading in data. So we may know, what something is around it or higher up or lower on the tree. So this is once again one of those other ways that we could just use these, DOM attributes and functions to our advantage. So let's type this out. List parent equals document, getElementById. It's okay if we use the same one repeatedly. It was created for a reason. Let's do a console log here. And we're going to look for the parent of the list. Now let's come down here and let's do another example, just kind of show these things in parallel here. So we're going to do let h2 parent equals document. We're going to get something else by ID as well. The attribute fun ID. We're going to ask it for its parent. Once again, element. This should be tipping you off that we're going to not be getting just like a node, but like a full thing back. Actually, let's go ahead and copy this on over so we have similar outputs. Dope. All right, and we see that the parent of the list here, which is what we're getting, is in fact the body, and that makes sense. We got this right here, but for the h2, that is the attribute fun, it's going to be the div, which is node. So obviously this is the parent of this, but this body is the parent of our unordered list right here. And for this one, and this is our last example we're going to do, and I could do this for hours. Well, I don't want to do it for hours, but this is our last one. And this is, like I said, it's just to get your feet wet, dip your toes in to see how we could access, maneuver, go around the DOM here. This is going to be previous element sibling. And so this is going to ask, what was the most previous sibling to me, not what my next sibling is. So we're once again going to use the list. So the previous element sibling. And let's log this out here. So we're going to be looking for, this is actually wrong. You'd be surprised how much this stuff happens when you're actually working, making the big bucks, and then you spend 3 hours and you realize you did something stupid like that. So now we have item 3. This is what we're getting. We're saying, what is your previous sibling? So like, obviously this is last here, but let's go ahead and do this. And we see that it is the li2, and it gives us the entire element. What if I wanted to come in here and type in this? We see that is item 1. So it's not going forward, it's just going back up the list, which is pretty cool. So you don't have to do it with lists. I think it's just easiest to show. But this is the second part of the DOM. Hope you appreciated it. And I will see you in the next section and or video.